Good day, I am Jetro Josh Villanueva of 4BBSHM, and today we're going to discuss a chapter 6 of Strategic Management, which is the corporate level strategies. This chapter introduces corporate strategy and its main elements in hospitality and tourism organizations. It discusses how different corporate strategies could add value internationally. The chapter also reflects on different approaches to corporate strategy, namely portfolio and competence approaches. Additionally, the chapter explains how HNT organizations can create and sustain the multi-business advantage, and it illuminates the complexities of developing corporate strategy at the international level. In particular, it explores the potential roles of the corporate center and its relationship with strategic business units, or the SBUs. The core tension between coordination and responsiveness is highlighted and discussed. Corporate strategy. Corporate strategy is the firm's overall approach to gaining a competitive advantage by operating in several businesses simultaneously. Gaining a competitive advantage requires setting a clear purpose for the entire organization and identifying plans and actions to achieve that purpose. At the corporate and headquarters level, hospitality and tourism organizations need to constantly ask themselves what business they are in, what business they should be in, what their basic directions are for the future, and what their attitude toward international markets is. For example, during its early years, Holiday Inn's purpose was to meet an unmet customer need, a gap in the market for quality accommodations through developing the Holiday Inn brand in the United States. With the saturation of the US market, the company decided to expand overseas. The purpose became a broader concept that included hotel properties, international customers, and employees outside of the domestic boundaries. Later, the decision to expand overseas was taken by the headquarters at that time, and it was also decided that the company would adopt strategies that were shaped by its home country culture. Holiday Inn set the standards for the rest of the world. This was the right system that gives people opportunities to build business, and with hard work and self-improvement, people can achieve great success, according to Nixon in 1997. Holiday Inn was later acquired, and it is now part of Intercontinental Hotels and Resorts. However, as it can be seen in the preceding example, the corporate strategy is the overall goal of an organization that reflects the core values and sets a directions about what business the company is in or is to be in, and what kind of company it presently is or is going to be. Developing a competitive corporate strategy requires flexibility in terms of being able to reallocate resources quickly and smoothly among different business units in response to changing market conditions. In order to be able to respond to the dynamism in the business environment and enhance competitiveness, organizations should develop flexible corporate strategies and identify effective means in order to achieve this flexibility. The next section describes different corporate strategies employed by large hospitality and tourism organizations.
Good day, I'm Kurt Stanley B. Daliola from 4BBSHM, and I will be tackling the portfolio approach. The portfolio approach in strategic management refers to a method where an organization treats its various business units, products, or projects as a collection or portfolio and manages them to achieve a balance that maximizes overall value. This approach is particularly useful for diversified companies with multiple lines of the businesses. The aim is to allocate resources effectively, assess the potential of each unit, and optimize the overall risk-return profile. So these are the key elements of the portfolio approach. Number 1 is the active management, a strategy where portfolio managers actively buy and sell securities in an attempt to outperform a benchmark. Example for this is a fund manager might overweight technology stocks believing the sector will outperform the market. Number 2 is the alpha, the excess return of an investment relative to its benchmark. The example is an alpha of 1% means the investment outperformed its benchmark by 1%. Number 3 is the asset allocation. the distribution of assets, stocks, bonds, real estate within a portfolio to achieve a preferred risk-return profile. The example is conservative investors often have a higher allocation of bonds, while aggressive investors want more exposure to growth stocks. Number 4 is the asset class, a group of investments with similar characteristics, stocks, bonds, real estate. Example is a diversified portfolio might include multiple asset classes. Number 5 is benchmark, a standard against which the performance of an investment or portfolio is measured. Example is a common benchmark for US stocks is the S&P 500 index. Number 6 is beta, a measure of an investment's volatility in relation to overall market. The example for the beta is a beta of 1 means the investment moves in line with the market, while a beta greater than 1 indicates higher volatility. Number 7 is the diversification, spreading investments across assets to lower risk. Example is owning stocks from different industries or countries. Number 8 is the index fund, a type of mutual fund or exchange-traded fund, ETF, that tracks the performance of a specific market index. The S&P 500 index, which tracks the largest 500 American publicly traded companies in terms of market capitalization. Number 9 is liquidity, the ease with which an asset can be converted into cash without affecting its market price. The example is stocks and ETFs are considered more liquid than real estate. Number 10 is the net asset value, or NAV, the value per share of a mutual fund or ETF on a specific date or time. The example for this is the NAV of a mutual fund fluctuates daily based on the market value of its underlying holdings. Number 11 is the passive management. It is a strategy that aims to replicate the performance of a benchmark index, often through investing in index funds or ETFs. The example for this is an investor might choose a passive S&P 500 index fund to mirror the performance of the US large cap market. Number 12 is the portfolio optimization, the process of selecting the best portfolio asset allocation given the investor's constraints and objectives. Number 13 is rebalancing, adjusting a portfolio's asset allocation back to its target percentages to maintain the desired risk-return profile. The example is selling some stocks and buying more bonds to return to a target allocation of 60% stocks and 40% bonds. Number 14 is risk tolerance, an investor's ability and willingness to withstand changes in the value of their holdings. The example for this is an investor with a high risk tolerance might be comfortable with a portfolio of mostly stocks. Number 15 is the risk-return trade-off, the principle that potential returns rise with an increase in risk. Thus, lower risk investments offer lower potential returns, while higher risk investments offer higher potential returns. The example for this is stocks are generally considered riskier than bonds, but they also have the potential for higher returns. Number 16 is the Sharpe ratio, a measure of risk-adjusted return, calculated as the excess return of an investment over the risk-free rate divided by its standard deviation. The example for this is a higher Sharpe ratio indicates better risk-adjusted performance. Number 17, the tracking error, the difference between the performance of a portfolio and the performance of its benchmark index. The example for this is a tracking error of 1% means the portfolio's return deviated from the benchmark return by 1%. Number 18 is the turnover, the percentage of a portfolio's holding that are sold and replaced over a specific period. The example for this is a high turnover rate can result in higher transaction costs and have tax implications. Number 19, volatility, the degree of variation in prices over time for a given asset. Stocks with high volatility experience larger price swings those with low volatility. Number 7 is the diversification. Spreading investments across assets to lower risk. Example is owning stocks from different industries or countries. Number 8 is the index fund, a type of mutual fund or exchange-traded fund, ETF, that tracks the performance of a specific market index. The S&P 500 index, which tracks the largest 500 American publicly traded companies in terms of market capitalization. Number 9 is liquidity, the ease with which an asset can be converted into cash without affecting its market price. The example is stocks and ETFs are considered more liquid than real estate. Number 10 is the net asset value, or NAV, the value per share of a mutual fund or ETF on a specific date or time. The example for this is the NAV of a mutual fund fluctuates daily based on the market value of its underlying holdings. Number 11 is the passive management. It is a strategy that aims to replicate the performance of a benchmark index, often through investing in index funds or ETFs. The example for this is an investor might choose a passive S&P 500 index fund to mirror the performance of the US large cap market. Number 12 is the portfolio optimization, the process of selecting the best portfolio asset allocation given the investor's constraints and objectives. Number 13 is rebalancing, adjusting a portfolio's asset allocation back to its target percentages to maintain the desired risk-return profile. The example is selling some stocks and buying more bonds to return to a target allocation of 60% stocks and 40% bonds. Number 14 is risk tolerance, an investor's ability and willingness to withstand changes in the value of their holdings. The example for this is an investor with a high risk tolerance might be comfortable with a portfolio of mostly stocks. Number 15 is the risk-return trade-off, the principle that potential returns rise with an increase in risk. Thus, lower risk investments offer lower potential returns, while higher risk investments offer higher potential returns. The example for this is stocks are generally considered riskier than bonds, but they also have the potential for higher returns. Number 16 is the Sharpe ratio, a measure of risk-adjusted return, calculated as the excess return of an investment over the risk-free rate divided by its standard deviation. The example for this is a higher Sharpe ratio indicates better risk-adjusted performance. Number 17, the tracking error, the difference between the performance of a portfolio and the performance of its benchmark index. The example for this is a tracking error of 1%, means the portfolio's return deviated from the benchmark return by 1%. Number 18 is the turnover, the percentage of a portfolio's holding that are sold and replaced over a specific period. The example for this is a high turnover rate can result in higher transaction costs and have tax implications. Number 19, volatility, the degree of variation in prices over time for a given asset. Stocks with high volatility experience larger price swings, those with low volatility. Next up is the portfolio analysis. The portfolio analysis is a method used in strategic management to evaluate and assess the overall performance, risk, and potential returns of a group of investments, products, or business units within an organization. The goal is to ensure that the portfolio as a whole is aligned with the company's strategic objectives and that resources are allocated efficiently to maximize returns while minimizing risk. So the two common tools used in the portfolio approach are the BCG matrix or the Boston Consulting Group matrix. This framework classifies business units or products into 4 categories: stars, cash cows, question marks, and dogs, based on market growth and market share. It helps in resource allocation decisions. Next up is the GE-McKinsey matrix, a more complex matrix that considers industry attractiveness and competitive strength to evaluate business units of products. The BCG growth share matrix suggests that as a product moves through its life cycle, it is categorized into one of the four types for the purpose of the funding decisions. First is the stars. Stars represent business units, products, or services that operate in high-growth markets and have a high market share. These are considered the most promising parts of a company's portfolio because they often generate significant revenue and have the potential to become future leaders in their industries. Next is cash cows. Cash cows represent business units, products, or services that operate in low-growth markets but have a higher market share. These are typically well-established and successful businesses that they generate consistent, reliable cash flow without requiring significant investments. Next is the question marks. The question marks, also called problem children, represent business units, products, or services that operate in high-growth markets but have a low market share. These are considered uncertain investments because, while the market offers growth opportunities, their weak competitive position makes their future uncertain. Last one is the dogs. Dogs represent business units, products, or services that operate in low-growth markets and have a low market share. These are often seen as underperforming or declining areas of a company's portfolio because they generate little profit and offer limited growth potential. Next is cash cows. Cash cows represent business units, products, or services that operate in low-growth markets but have a higher market share. These are typically well-established and successful businesses that they generate consistent, reliable cash flow without requiring significant investments. Next is the question marks. The question marks, also called problem children, represent business units, products, or services that operate in high-growth markets but have a low market share. These are considered uncertain investments because, while the market offers growth opportunities, their weak competitive position makes their future uncertain. Last one is the dogs. Dogs represent business units, products, or services that operate in low-growth markets and have a low market share. These are often seen as underperforming or declining areas of a company's portfolio because they generate little profit and offer limited growth potential.
Let's take a look at portfolio strategy as a corporate-level strategy. To formulate effective strategies, companies must be able to answer these basic questions. What business are we in? How should we compete in this industry? Who are our competitors, and how should we respond to them? These simple but powerful questions are at the heart of corporate, industry, and firm-level strategies. Corporate-level strategy is the overall organizational strategy that addresses the question, what business or businesses should we be in? One of the standard strategies for stock market investors is diversification, or owning stocks in a variety of companies in different industries. The purpose of this strategy is to reduce risk in the overall stock portfolio, the entire collection of stocks. This basic idea is simple. If you invest in 10 companies and in 10 different industries, you won't lose your entire investment if one company performs poorly. Furthermore, because they're in different industries, one company's losses are likely to be offset by another company's gains. Portfolio strategy is a corporate-level strategy that minimizes risks by diversifying investment among various businesses or lines. Just as in diversification strategy guides an investor who invests in a variety of stocks, portfolio strategy guides the strategic decisions of corporations that compete in a variety of businesses. Just as investors consider the mix of stocks in their stock portfolio when deciding which stocks to buy or sell, managers following portfolio strategy try to acquire companies that fit well with the rest of their corporate portfolio and sell those that don't. First, according to portfolio strategy, the more businesses in which a corporation competes, the smaller its overall chances of failing. Think of a corporation as a stool and its businesses as the legs of the stool. The more legs or businesses added to the stool, the less likely it is to tip over. Managers employing portfolio strategy can either develop a new business initially or look for acquisitions, that is, other companies to buy. Either way, the goal is to add legs to the stool. Second, beyond adding new businesses to corporate portfolios, portfolio strategy predicts that companies can reduce risk even more through unrelated diversification, creating or acquiring companies in completely unrelated businesses. More on the accuracy of this prediction later. According to portfolio strategy, when businesses are unrelated, losses in one business or industry should have minimum effect on the performance of other companies in the corporate portfolio. Third, investing in portfolios and cash flows from slow-growth businesses into newer, faster-growing businesses can reduce long-term risk. The best-known portfolio strategy for guiding investment in a corporation's businesses is the Boston Consulting Group, or BGC Matrix. The BGC Matrix is a portfolio strategy that managers use to categorize their corporation's businesses by growth rate relative to market share, which helps them decide how to invest corporate funds. The matrix, shown here, separates businesses into 4 categories based on how fast the market is growing, high growth or low growth, and the size of the business's share of that market, small or large. Stars are companies that have a large share of a fast-growing market. To take advantage of a star's fast-growing market and its strength in the market, a large share, the corporation must invest substantially in it. The investment is usually worthwhile, however, because many stars produce sizable future profits. Question marks are companies that have a small share of a fast-growing market. If the corporation invests in these companies, they may eventually become stars, but their relative weakness in the market, small share, makes investing in the question mark riskier than investing in stars. Cash cows are companies that have a large share of a slow-growing market. Companies in this situation are often highly profitable, hence the name cash cow. Finally, dogs are companies that have a small share of a slow-growing market. As the name suggests, having a small share of a slow-growth market is often not profitable. In sum, in contrast to a single, undiversified business or unrelated diversification, related diversification reduces risk because the different businesses can work as a team, relying on each other for needed expertise, experience, and support.
The Directional Policy Matrix, or the DPM, is a strategic tool used to evaluate a company's business units or products based on 2 key dimensions: market attractiveness and business strength. It helps organizations prioritize investments, allocate resources, and make strategic decisions about which business units to grow, maintain, or divest. Similar to other portfolio management tools, like the BCG Matrix, the DPM provides a visual representation of how different parts of a company's portfolio are performing and what strategic actions should be taken. Whelan and Hunger 2006 proposed 4 steps to plot business units on the GE business screen. Number 1 is to select criteria to rate the industry for each product line or business unit. Assess overall industry attractiveness for each product line or business unit on a scale from 1, very unattractive, to 5, very attractive. Number 2 is to select the key factors needed for success in each product line or business unit. Assess business strength, competitive position for each product line or business unit on a scale of 1, very weak, to 5, very strong. Number 3, plot each product lines or business units' current position in a matrix like that depicted in the figure. Number 4 is to plot the firm's future portfolio, assuming that present corporate and business strategies remain unchanged. Is there a performance gap between projected and desired portfolios? If so, this gap should serve as stimulus to the review organization's current vision, objectives, strategies, and policies. Number 3. Plot each product lines or business unit's current position and a matrix like that depicted in the figure. Number 4 is to plot the firm's future portfolio, assuming that present corporate and business strategies remain unchanged. Is there a performance gap between projected and desired portfolios? If so, this gap should serve as stimulus to the review organization's current vision, objectives, strategies, and policies.
The GE McKinsey Matrix was developed in 1971 by McKinsey at the request of General Electric to support the management of its diversified corporate portfolio. This matrix adopts two dimensions, similarly to the BCG matrix approach: market segment attractiveness and business strength. Contrarily to the BCG matrix, which employs two simple indicators, market growth and relative market share, as proxies of attractiveness and competitive positioning, each of the GE McKinsey dimensions is built up from a large number of variables. This leads to the multi-attributes approach characterizing this strategic tool. By systematically weighting those variables, each business or product is classified into one of 9 cells in a 3x3 matrix. Like the BCG matrix, this approach aims to compare investment opportunities. As stated above, the difference lies in the fact that multiple measures are used to assess market attractiveness and competitive position. GE McKinsey's main goals are to allocate resources correctly, to choose the business to invest in, to maintain and to divest, and to analyze the strategies of competitors. So the GE McKinsey matrix uses a multi-attribute approach to position SBUs into 9 cells, coming from the crossing of the axis industry attractiveness and SBU competitive positioning. Such multi-attribute approach works as follows. Industry attractiveness is measured by several parameters, such as market size, growth rate, profit margin potentials, competitive intensity, cyclical or seasonal sales, position on learning curve. Those parameters are assigned a weighting factor by the decision maker on the basis of their relative importance. After that, the decision maker assigns each parameter a rating from 1 to 10. The final score for each parameter is calculated by multiplying the weight by the rating. The weighted average resulting from the sum of all scores provides an indication about industry attractiveness. Similarly, relative SBU positioning and its trends are calculated as a weighted average of the following parameters: relative market share, price competitiveness, product or service quality perception, market's knowledge of customers and the market, sales effectiveness, and geographical coverage. The crossing of industry attractiveness and business trends allows to position a given SBU in one of 9 cells, for which specific guidelines or recommended strategies are provided. SBUs whose positioning is deemed desirable are placed in cells 1, 2, and 3 at the top left corner of the matrix. Here, the tool suggests an invest-grow strategy. SBUs with an undesirable positioning from 7 to 9 should be treated with a harvest-divest strategy, while SBUs with an in-between positioning from 4 to 6 should be managed with a selective strategy mostly aimed at generating earnings. After having analyzed these matrices in detail, what are their main pros and cons when we compare them? The BCG tool is simple but simplistic. In fact, growth may not mean attractiveness, since attractiveness is driven by many structural determinants beyond growth, as the 5 forces teach us. Moreover, relative market share may not mean competitive advantage, since niche strategies may prevail. On the contrary, GE McKinsey is extremely detailed, but it requires expensive analysis to be completed. Also, it becomes subjective as decision makers have to decide the weighting factors and the ratings. Usually, the two matrices are used in a combined way when assessing a company's portfolio and formulating a corporate strategy.
Corporate strategy and adding value. A well-defined corporate strategy is essential for guiding a company toward its objectives and adapting to changing marketing conditions. By focusing on value creation through customer satisfaction, efficiency, innovation, and strong branding, companies can achieve sustainable growth and a competitive edge in their industry. Large organizations that operate in highly dynamic and competitive markets face different types of pressure. Number 1, pressure to reduce costs. Number 2, pressure to increase revenue. Number 3, pressure to increase market share. Number 4, pressure to be responsive to the markets in which they operate. Number 5, pressure to innovate and stay relevant. Number 6, pressure to satisfy shareholders and stakeholders. And lastly, number 7, pressure to transfer information, knowledge, and competencies among business units and functional areas. Large H&T organizations must adopt a low-cost strategy and adapt their offerings to local market conditions to gain a competitive advantage. Balancing competing demands and maintaining synergy among business units and functional areas is crucial for collective work towards corporate goals. Goshal and Bartlett 1990 identified 4 main strategies for multinational corporations: international, multi-domestic, global, and transnational, addressing competing demands and addressing competing demands. International strategy involves transferring core competencies and resources for home-to-host country market using a decentralized approach. Local networks and competencies are exploited, but adoption is limited. This strategy is suitable for markets where local responsiveness is not urgent. A multi-domestic strategy focuses on local responsiveness, design products and services based on local customer preferences, requiring high operational costs and autonomous business units responsible for strategic decisions. The specifications are: it is a decentralized federation of local companies linked by a web or personal controls. The second one is expertise from the home country organization occupied key positions. And lastly, its strength lays in a high degree of local responsiveness. Global strategy centralizes corporate decisions, standardized product and services, and standardized marketing activities for economies of scale. It's suitable for cost reduction and low local adoption demand. Global strategy fosters cooperations, resource sharing, and learning from the center. The specifications are: the firm makes standardized products and services. The second one, it is often centralized. And lastly, control of strategic decisions, resources, and information is tight. And the next one is the transnational strategy. Transnational strategy balances cost reduction with local demands, requiring global coordination and flexibility. It involves managing integrative links between local companies and the center, sharing knowledge and competencies for global operations, and ensuring local responsiveness. And the specifications are, number one, it is made up of a network of specialized or differentiated units. The second one, attention is paid to managing integrative links among local companies as well as with the center. And lastly, this organizational form has undoubtedly been held up, possibly the ideal organizational structural form. The core competence approach. Core competencies are valuable, rare, and inimitable resources that give an organization a competitive edge in the market. They include embedded skills, processes, and culture, making it difficult for rivals to duplicate. At least three tests can be applied to identify core competencies in large agency organizations. First, a core competence provides potential access to a wide variety of markets. Second, a core competence should make a significant contribution to the perceived customer benefits. And third, a core competence should be difficult and for competitors to imitate. Senior managers should collaborate with individual businesses to achieve common goals, fostering synergies among different units by addressing their interests and fostering collaborations. These are encourage collective learning within corporations, especially how to coordinate diverse production skills and integrate multiple streams of technologies. Second one is encourage open communication and deep commitment, working across organizational boundaries by involving many levels of people and functions across different brands. According to Prahalad and Hamel, 1996, a corporation is like a tree, in that it grows from its roots. Are the roots that nourish core products and engender business units.
Creating and sustaining the multi-business advantage. According to Barney and Desterly 2008, the research-based view is proposed as an alternative view to analyze the competitive advantage of firms. Unlike Porter's positioning view, the resource-based view suggests that a competitive advantage comes from a firm's unique resources. They must have valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-sustainable resources possessed both by the corporation and business units. And the corporation should be organized in a way that it can efficiently and effectively exploit these resources. Due to globalization and rapid economic, technological, and socio-cultural changes, organization needs to be innovative, adaptable, quick, and efficient when using their resources and abilities. Knowledge, experience, and dedication of employees and managers of different business units are often accepted important factors in creating and developing unique resources and competencies. In particular, the kind and degree of coordinated and leveraged skill and knowledge is an global organization, which determine its core capability, differentials, and its ultimate sustainable global competitive advantage. Regardless of the approach adopted to sustain and create a competitive advantage, there are issues with which each hospitality and tourism organization with multi-business units struggles on the road to developing and maintaining a competitive advantage. There are balances to be struck in the continuing process of developing economic of scale, while at the same time being responsive to the needs of each business unit and its external environment, nurturing diversity while seeking integration, and maintaining flexibility while keeping focus. Creating and sustaining a multi-business advantage involves strategically managing a portfolio of diverse business units to leverage synergies and enhance competitive positioning. This approach requires a clear vision and strong leadership to ensure that each unit aligns with the overarching corporate strategy while also capitalizing on unique market opportunities. Organization must foster collaboration among units, sharing resources, expertise, and best practices to drive innovation and efficiency. Additionally, maintaining a flexible structure allows businesses to adapt to changing market dynamics and consumer preferences. Continuously assessment of each unit's performance and the overall portfolio ensures that the company can optimize resources allocation and diverse underperforming assets by focusing on integrated growth and mutual reinforcement among its businesses. A company can achieve a sustainable competitive edge that is difficult for rivals to replicate. Porter 1996 proposes an action program for those organizations with multi-businesses units to address these issues. An organization should begin to develop a corporate strategy by identifying an existing portfolio of business units in order to find ways to enhance the competitive advantage of existing units. It should then select the core businesses that will be the foundation of the corporate strategies. Core businesses are those that are in an attractive industry, have the potential to achieve a sustainable competitive advantage, and have important interrelationship with other businesses units. It should create horizontal organization mechanism to facilitate interrelationship among the core businesses. Top management can facilitate interrelationship by emphasizing cross-unit collaborations, grouping unit organizationally, modify incentives, and taking steps to build a strong sense of corporate identity. Corporate level strategy in the international perspective. The scope of international strategy is large and involves not only international organizations but also different nations. Some argue that international strategy is a function of a competitive advantage of multinational operations. Corporate level strategy in the international perspective involves the overarching plan that guides a company's operation across different countries and markets. This strategy addresses how a firm can leverage its competencies, resources, and capabilities to gain a competitive advantage on a global scale. Company must assess various factors, including cultural differences, regulatory environments, and economic conditions, to effectively tailor their strategies to each market. A successful international corporate strategy aligns with the company overall vision while navigating the complexities of global business dynamics, ultimately aiming for sustainable growth and profitability across diverse geographies. Porter 1990s identified two types of strategy that organizations can follow internationally: multi-domestic and global. He defined that multi-domestic strategies as country-centered strategies. An organization exploiting multi-domestic strategy will pursue separate strategy in each of its foreign markets. The headquarters of the multi-domestic company will be responsible for financial and marketing policies and practices, but it will decentralize business strategies and operations. In terms of global strategy, he indicates that an organization that is exploiting global strategy will see its competitive position in one country as significantly influenced by its position in other countries. An organization therefore must integrate its activity on a worldwide basis to capture the leakage among countries. The strategy is centralized, but operation may be centralized or decentralized depending on economies and effectiveness. According to Perlmutter, 1969, he identified four approaches to international strategy. One is ethnocentric, home country-oriented; polycentric, host country-oriented; regiocentric, regionally oriented; and geocentric, world-oriented. An organization that pursues an ethnocentric strategy treats foreign markets as an extension of domestic markets. Polycentric strategy would acknowledge that there are differences between domestic markets and the other markets, and the strategy would have been designed to maximize local responsiveness. Geocentric strategy recognizes that there are global similarities in both cultures and markets. Therefore, it encompasses that best practices are adapted on a global basis and adapted for local conditions where necessary. Region-centric strategies view region as a potential market, ignoring national boundaries. The organization develops strategies and organizes activity on a regional basis. These strategies shape the international organization mission, governance, and organization structures. In hospitality organization, pursuing an ethnocentric strategy, the decision-making is centralized in quarters. Home country standards are applied to evaluate and control the performance of the organization. You would normally expect a high volume of orders, commands, and advice to the subsidiaries in other countries. People in the home country are developed for key positions everywhere in the world. The implication of a polycentric strategy would have been a decentralized decision-making structure and more authority to the subsidiaries. Home standard would be used to evaluate and control the performance of the subsidiaries. There will be a minimal orders and advice to or from headquarters. People of local nationality are developed for key positioning in the own country. In the case of regiocentric strategy, the decision-making is centralized in regional headquarters and there is a high collaboration among subsidiaries, standard to measure and control performance and determined regionally. There is little communication to or from headquarters, but it may be high to or from regional headquarters and among countries. Regional people are developed for key positioning anywhere in the region. Geocentric strategy involved collaboration of headquarters and subsidiaries around the world. The standard identified to measure and control performance of universal and local. Communication is both ways from headquarters and subsidiaries and among subsidiaries around the world. The best qualified people everywhere in the world are developed for key positioning everywhere in the world. That's all.